everyone. Hi, my name is Yara, and I'm going to talk about the best board games in the ancient world. So my article is from the Smithsonian magazine, and it talks about a variety of board games, but I'm only going to be able to cover a few today. So about the Smithsonian magazine, it's more of a journal than it is a magazine. I think it's a very cool platform that covers a lot of different interesting topics. Science, history, pop culture, art, and recently my favorite thing that I saw on their website is their smart travel news section. A lot of cool things. For example, they had one of the better explanations about the first of its kind art installation in Egypt. If anyone wants a link, feel free to reach out. It's a magazine a platform that started in Washington, D.C., and it's by the author Melian Solly. She's an art and science journalist. So the first game I'm going to talk about is Annette. Please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing anything. So I'll go into most detail about this game. It's Senet, which is also known as the Passing, and it's one of the earliest known board games from Egypt. This picture is of one of the Senet boards, and it's one of the most common ones that I saw in my research. So apparently this game was loved by people like the young pharaoh Tutankhamun and Queen Nefertari. So it was played by upper class members of Egyptian society, and they were very highly decorated and detailed board games. So people who couldn't afford this board game used to make grids scratched on stone surfaces, tables, or even the floor. But it was very popular back then. So the Senet is a long board made up of 30 squares, as you can see here. And it's made up of 30 squares laid out in 3 parallel rows that are in rows of 10. So like most complex strategy games, players have the opportunity to beat their opponents by blocking them, competing with them, or pushing them back to start from zero. So basically off the board. In this game, there are 2 players and they receive equal number of tokens, usually between 5 to 7, and they race to the end of the board. So rather than rolling the dice, they roll they actually throw casting sticks or bones, which I thought was super interesting. So you can see in the photo here on the bottom right, they have sticks that are marked and unmarked, and depending on where the stick lands, that's the number of steps that you take. So I thought that was very interesting. The next thing about the Senet, I did a bit more digging, and actually I found out that it's a way to reveal Egyptian afterlife. So it's a report from Peter Picone, and it represents different events of their afterlife. So there are 6 special squares or houses. And for example, house 15, which is on the middle of the board, as you can see here, it's a symbol of, it's actually the house of rebirth, and usually symbolized with a frog. And for Egyptian, it's a symbol of resurrection in the Egyptian symbols. Another house is house 27. And if someone lands on house 27, they can get back to square 1 or square 15. And these are just a few of the important squares. And it kind of just reminds me like when you're going back to like jail when you're playing Monopoly and then you have to start again. And the goal is to get to square 30 and to beat your opponent. So this also reminds me of Tawla, which is a lot of people online were saying that it reminds them of Tawla. Personally, I think it reminds me more of Monopoly, but a lot of people are saying it looks like Bakman, which is perfect segue to the next game, which is Bakman or Tawla, which is more than 5,000 years old. So the article says that the origins are unknown, but again, I looked into it and found that the origins are from Iraq. So I'm not going to tell you how to play, but I wanted to highlight one of the most interesting things about the board. So it's divided into 24 narrow triangles in 2 sets of 12. So I thought it was interesting that the 12 points represent each month of the year, and the 24 points represent the 24 hours in a day. And if you don't know much about this game, it's all about a mix of skill and luck. And it was very interesting. I had no idea that these designs represented these months and days. And I also want to share that there are up to 25 versions of playing Bakman. So we all usually have our own rules of how to play, but I never really thought it was that different. So I thought it was interesting that there are that many versions. The next game is a very popular game, which is chess. So this has a really interesting backstory to it. So the article mentions that it's Indian, which is chaturanga, which means four limbs. So it's four limbs of the Gupta Empire, which is the army, the infantry, the cavalry, and the chariots and war elephants. So it was first played with 4 players, unlike today we have 2. And Indian merchants introduced a revised game, which was then to the Persian Empire, which was then transformed to shatranj. So that's what the article says. But I looked into it and I found a really interesting story from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they show how the name evolved. So they say that there was a contest of refinement and intelligence between the Indians and the Persians. So the Indian ruler created this game of chess and then bet that the Iranian leader would not be able to solve it or unravel it. So they accepted the challenge, and not only did they solve the mystery, but they sent it back with Bakman. I thought it was a really interesting background story to an incredibly popular game. The next thing I found interesting was that the origins of the word checkmate, so check and checkmate stems from Persian, shahmat, or in Arabic, it's sheikhmat, which also translates to dead king. It seems very obvious, but once you read it or say it out loud, I thought it was something interesting and new to me. So to go back, it started in India and then moved to the Persian Empire. Then once the Arab armies conquered the Persian Empire, the game started to evolve, and so did its pieces. So this is one of the pieces from pieces that was found in Jordan a couple of years ago. It's actually from the Smithsonian magazine as well. And they saw that this was a chess piece, but although it looks different from what it is today, researchers showed that the origins of chess did not change, but rather it showed how quickly it gained traction around the world, and now it's a staple game everywhere. The next game I wanted to quickly highlight is the Mehen, which is, according to the Otaga Museum, it's called the snake game, which is also because it's shaped like a coiled snake. So it comes from the snake god, which is called Mehen, who wrapped around Ra, which is the sun, to protect him in his journeys. So who knew the game snake started in Egypt. So it can have up to 6 players, and the goal is to move the lion pieces and sphere pieces across the track. So in this picture, you can only see the sphere pieces, but in other games, they also have lion pieces instead. So a typical Mehen board game comes with 3 pieces of the lion, 3 pieces of the lioness, and then other sets of marble. So the goal is to move your snake's head and to move your snake to the head and back before your opponent's lion catches you. So the exact rules are very unclear because the game declined in Egypt. But when I researched about the Mehens, a lot of it mentioned that this game is very similar to our modern game of snake and ladders, and it's very interesting that how it was adapted from then and now. And so that's it for looking into the board games in the Arab world. As mentioned, there are so many different games mentioned, but I put a few more resources on how to play and the backgrounds of it. And feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, or email. Thank you.